everybody. My name is Aida Dargahi. I'm the Director of Humanities Lecture Series and faculty at Foothill College, the Humanities Department. It's an honor to have you here, and I'm so delighted to welcome you to one of our first post-pandemic lecture series on campus. Prior to the pandemic, we had them on this lecture series on campus. Then we moved it to an online, of course, to Zoom. This is the first one after, I think, almost 3 years. So, as I mentioned, I'm very delighted to welcome you to our first post-pandemic on-campus humanities lecture series. Thank you for joining us on this special journey. In a rapidly evolving society driven by technology and scientific advancement, it is crucial not to overlook the enduring significance of the humanities. The Humanities Lecture Series offers a remarkable opportunity to embark on an intellectual odyssey along scholars, lifelong learners. This series is also a celebration of human experience designed to ignite our curiosity, challenge our perspectives, and deepen our understanding of the world we live in. Get ready. Get ready to be captivated, inspired, and transformed as we embark on the Humanities Lecture Series, where the power of the human mind and spirit will be illuminated like never before. So, before I introduce our distinguished speaker today, a few housekeeping words. We are going to have a 45-minute lecture followed by a 15-minute Q&A. So 1 hour the total. And for those of you seeking extra credit, the sign-up sheet will be outside at the end of the lecture. So, and then you can sign it up there, and then I will take care of the rest. And let me go to the other. So, today we have the good fortune of having our own, our very own Dr. Falk Cammin. I'm sure most of you know her, and she is our distinguished guest speaker today. Let me tell you a few words about Dr. Cammin. Falk Cammin received her PhD in German studies from Stanford University. Her research interests are focused on interdisciplinary and comparative aspects of post-World War II German culture and contemporary German literature and film. Dr. Cammin has taught in a variety of settings, including the Humanities and German department at Stanford University. At Foothill, she has taught courses for major, non-major, and honors students. Since 2017, she has served as the program director for the Foothill Dianza Humanities Mellon Scholars Program. In this lecture, Dr. Cammin explores the intersection of art, history, and cultural identity. Without further ado, join me welcoming Dr. Falk Cammin.
Thank you so much, Aida, for that very kind introduction. And it is lovely to see you here. It is so much better to do this in person than having to sit on Zoom. And when I suggested, we do this back here in person, Aida was gracious to entertain this whim. It is true, I am a professor here at Foothill, but I have gone into semi-retirement. So this lecture today also kind of looks a little back at my history here at Foothill. Since I am kind of this academic year not a professor, I want to really do this lecture in a different style. You see, when you have students, you need to teach students something, right? And in some way that really goes against the grain of humanities. If you right now sit here with questions, and by the end of the lecture, you walk out with more questions, I have done my job. Because see, at the core, humanities is about fostering critical thinking. And it is not about answering questions. That is easy. What is hard is finding the right questions that are pertinent for our time. And I hope that, my thinking about this that has culminated into this lecture will also spur incredible dislocation of the feeling that you know anything. Because I think as human beings, we really do not know anything. Yet we have this incredible chutzpah to believe that we know something because we need to move into the future. And this is part of our human condition, which I will talk about in a moment. So the topic for today is really asking the question, is there a stable concept of history? We use history so much in how we think about our own lives, how we think about politics, how we really think about the world. But is there such a thing? And there might be something like this, but is it accessible to us? Or what are the limits in how we access this particular history? And as I am talking, you are probably going, wow, she has an accent. Where is she from? Whenever you ask a German that question, where are you from? You are activating, a certain kind of a radar where the response that you get from somebody when you disclose that you are German helps you detect any murky undertones. And in my description of this talk, I said it was a little bit of comedy. And since my retreat from teaching, I have been exploring comedy a little bit more. So I'm going to give you 2 lines of my comedy, which is a little bit off color and maybe not so appropriate for this academic setting. But as I told you, I am currently not teaching here, so I'm somewhat. So in my comedy routine, what I do is I talk about these murky undertones, right? And then, I say I am from Europe. And that never ends this line of inquiry. You can tell I'm in my comedic mode right now, right? That never ends, that line of inquiry when I say I am from Europe. You see, Americans, they can say I am from America, claiming not only the country you live on, but the whole continent, right? When does that ever spur a follow-up question? Oh, where in America you are from? And if you are from Mexico or any other country outside the United States, you will get that joke. So for me, it's never going to be enough to say I'm from Europe. Invariably, there comes the follow-up question, where in Europe are you from? And then, I am always on edge, because is my response going to get this kind of reaction? Germany, I love Germany. What are you getting so excited about, you sick bastard? See, and when you laugh because you understand the history of my country. You understand the fraud history. And when I was born into a nation of perpetrators. And that was a heavy, heavy history that weighed on my country. So growing up, history was a huge topic in my country, in my family, and for myself. And that led to this interest in history. So that's just a little bit about myself before we delve further into the question of, what is history and how do we access it, and is there a there there? This is a quote by James Baldwin. And, he talks about, that we are basically constituted by our history. And that, I understand that sentiment, and I think that is often how we think about history. But the question is history a stable entity that we can rely on in making any kind of affirmative statements about ourselves? And hopefully my ruminations on this topic will show you that these concepts are not stable, that they change over time, and also our current interests always, always, always drive what it is that we are interested in. When we look at that huge pile of events and artifacts that compromise the past. Much of the past has been actually forgotten. And to put it further into this, so the question here is, what is history, as I said, and then how do we encounter history? And just to put things a little bit in perspective, we kind of center our human experience when we think about history, but of course we live in a larger context. We live on this beautiful, gorgeous planet that we are currently bound on destroying, and this planet has a long, long, long history. And if you are a geologist, you will probably appreciate this. Humanities is really the study of everything, and that is what is so wonderful. And at the beginning of the lecture, I told Professor Dalgahi to give me a 5-minute warning, because really, my mind is like moving everywhere, and that is the beauty of humanities. And if you have not yet taken a humanities class, don't walk, run after this lecture to sign up for a humanities class. Because humanities is not bound by the confines of an academic discipline. We are able to include geology, in a humanities lecture. We can talk about art, we can talk about history, we can talk about film. We can really talk about anything that helps us make sense. That's really at the core what we as humans love to do. So when I prepared the lecture, I literally did a deep delve into the different epochs and how this is chunked up. And I'm not going to bore you with this, because as I looked at the big picture of the lecture, I realized, whoa, you're getting into the weeds there. But that is the lovely thing about studying humanities, that it allows you to follow your brain into the weeds, and you might find incredible gems in those weeds if you allow yourself the time to explore. You also might have seen this before. This talks about, on a regular clock, how much of a 24-hour day, or 12-hour day, I guess here, see, I'm not a math teacher, a 12-hour day, how much time actually have we been on this planet? And so to put it in perspective, of this clock, if this were the age of the Earth that we saw on the previous slide, we would literally have appeared during the last 2 seconds of this clock. So it's insignificant. The planet is going to be indifferent to our survival. The planet is going to be indifferent to our survival. Yet we care so much. And if you look in art, you will see stories from the beginning of time where objects that are not human yearn to be human. And why do they yearn to be human? Because we have these emotions and we have these passions. And in these 2 seconds of the 12-hour clock are felt by us so intensely, and they are so important to us. And imagine how much our lifetime would be. Nanosecond is too big for that. Because, we as humans, modern humans, we appear, only 200,000 years ago. And think about how much does a house cost in the Bay Area? The years we have been here would not even buy you a condo in the Bay Area. Think about that. And then 50,000 years ago, we have this amazing leap with our prefrontal cortex to develop language. And that's when we get underway when it comes to humanities, because humanities investigates the records that humans have created, are in the process of creating, to explain our human condition. So explain these deep human questions like, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to live a good life? And I can see some of you are interested. Again, let me do another plug. Run to sign up, because those classes are going to fill in 1 second after this lecture. Okay, so now we have arrived, from the planet we have arrived to the existence of humans, and then the question becomes, okay, what is it about us? What makes us so different? Often it is said, we are somewhere between the animals and the angels, and this kind of conceptions that we, of course, have created about ourselves. Nobody has said that about us. We have said that about us. We want to elevate ourselves. We want to elevate ourselves over other biological life forms, whose DNA we share to a very large extent. But we want to elevate it because we feel that we are in a different situation than others. One of this, and this begins to tie back to my general topic, is that we have an understanding of time, and we do understand that our time here on the planet is finite. In addition, we are super curious creatures. You know, all animals are curious, but I would argue that, you know, humans are perhaps unrelentingly curious in rushing toward what seems dangerous. I mean, you know, danger and thrill lie so closely together. So, you know, why not go in this tent where you're not supposed to go? The other thing, you know, we have is we search for gratification, and we share this again with other animals, but I'm not 100% sure about animals, but I know from my own life and my students' life that dissatisfaction is built in. You know, you yearn for that car, that first car. Oh, only if I could have a Nissan Sentra, only if I could have a car. And then you have that Nissan Sentra, and I guarantee you, 2 seconds later, you're gonna go, oh, I want a BMW. You know, we are no way able to enjoy our successes. You know, we write a great paper, 5 seconds later, you know, we are off to the next thing. So dissatisfaction seems to be built into our human condition, and, you know, obviously that also drives our relentless pursuit of knowledge, of thrills, of experiences. But as I said, you know, like other animals, we have that understanding that inevitably we are going to die. And yes, everybody thinks, in my case, there's going to be an exception made, but the fact is, you know, life is a sexually transmitted condition that is not curable. Nobody is going to get out of here alive, so, you know, that's why we want to make the most of it, right? And what does it mean for us to make the most out of life? To make the most out of life is to endure past our lifetime, to extend our influence of our limitations as a human. That seems to be driving us significantly. So we want our life to have meaning. We want it to mean something, to perhaps make a difference for ourselves, for our families, for our planet. We want there to be some meaning. If this is just a meaningless time here, and in the big scheme of things, it doesn't matter because the planet doesn't care about our survival, we would be majorly bummed about this. This would go against who deeply we are. And when I say this, I mean every human being on the planet, in some shape or form, needs there to be some meaning. And how do we know this? Because all over the world, wherever we go, people tell stories. And narration is the way we take material from our experiences and we shape it into a form that gives some kind of a conclusion and some kind of a meaning. Narration is deeply, deeply satisfying to all human beings. This is something that we respond to, you know, like crack for the brain. And in humanities, you're going to hear a lot of stories. It's going to be really, really, really awesome that way. And these stories are also going to make you think about life in many ways. And you know, the stories obviously, to tie this back to the topic of my lecture, the stories obviously move through time. And here, you know, is where my troubles began, to quote from Mouse, which we're going to be looking at a little later. Okay, so human perspective of time. So human perspective of time, surprisingly, is not universally shared. There are cultures, linguistically, that address time in different manners. It is obviously, you know, there is a three-part structure of future, past, and present, but how time moves and evolves and how, you know, we look at tomorrow, for example, is can be fundamentally different. So let me show you an example here, and you know, since I am German, I'm going to use an example for German. So one of the incredible traits of my people is that we are very punctual. You know, when I ever was late to class, literally it pained me, yeah? So punctuality is super important. We're super concerned with that. So, you know, kind of like, can't be late, can't be, you know, late. So when we ask what time it is, we literally ask how late it is. Wie spät ist es?
Wow.
So that means how late is it? We are already like concerned that we are late, right? And I always make the joke in my comedy routine at my wedding, half of the guests were German and they were afraid that they were late because it was a German wedding, and the other half was Mexican and they were worried that they were way too early. So, you know, different perceptions of time, right? Thank you for laughing, that's awesome. Okay, different perceptions of time. Also, you know, how do we look at time, right? Do we look at time in terms of length? Or do we look at time in terms of volume? Different languages conceptualize it in different ways. And when I started at Foothill, believe it or not, I was hired as a German teacher and as an ESL teacher. And you know, ESL is the study of English to non-native speakers, right? And so, you know, what my favorite class was this grammar class that taught the tense system. And I'm going to ask you this right now. Native speakers, not non-natives, because we had to study this and it was horrendous. But, you know, native speakers, how many tenses do you think there are in English? So, you know, we have past, we have future, and we have present, right? So how many tenses do you think there are in English? Just give me a number. It's not a test. This is not.
Maybe 9.
39. 39.
No, 9.
9. Okay, 39 would be like, wow, 9. Okay, 9. Anybody higher than 9? Anybody higher than 9?
She's going to prove me wrong.
There are actually 12.
Oh,
And
you're close.
Mona, Dr. Rao, you are actually correct in my language and maybe also in your native language. Because this is another thing, you know, the humanities department is awesome. Almost all teachers have an accent. You know, they are all from different cultures, which is great. So take many different classes in the department. Anyway, so there are 12 different languages in English, right? And you're wondering, like, it's my native language. I have no idea that there are 12 languages. I don't believe it, you know. But what it indicates about English and about your understanding of time is that it's very, very specific. And I think the most interesting aspect, which my language lacks, is the distinction between something happening on a general, you know, generally, and something happening right now. So if I say to you, I give lectures, that is the present tense. But it doesn't mean right now. It means this is a habit. I do it on a habitual basis, right? But if I say to you, I am giving a lecture, that is right now. And that distinction between something doing habitually and doing it right now does not exist in my language. And particularly interesting, I think, is this future perfect progressive, you know, which was really hard to teach my students because first of all, we don't use it very much. And secondly, it has, you know, 3 helping verbs to be formed, and you know, so that would be, you know, in 10 minutes I will have been talking for, you know, will have been talking, that is the future progressive. Isn't that amazing? Mm-hmm. Future perfect progressive. So it looks at the future from a perspective of the past. So, you know, you get to mix things here, right? It's not all the future, it's not all the past. And even in the past, you get to distinguish between different paths of the past with the past perfect progressive. I won't bore you any longer. Luckily, I evolved to be a humanities instructor. You are my joy, let me say. Okay, all right. So I also want to tell you that I started at Foothill in 1989. Yes. You know, I was like 4 years old when I started here. And in 1989, just to kind of like make you think back about that time, many of you were not even born yet. And that was the year when the Berlin Wall came down. I was teaching at Foothill, and I wasn't in Berlin to see this happen, you know. But here we go, you know, the Berlin Wall came down. And, you know, that caused a huge reconfiguration of the political landscape of Europe. And right now, you know, with Ukraine and Russia, we see the ramifications of this moment. I mean, this kind of is definitely one of the events in that chain of history. There also, you know, was the Tiananmen Square uprising that you see here in China. And then in our very own Bay Area, it was the Loma Prieta earthquake. And I was actually here on campus walking down to my car and the earth began to shake and I thought, no, I don't want to have a heart attack right now. I just got a full-time job. So, and then I realized it was an earthquake, it wasn't me. I was hugely relieved. How horrible is that, right? I mean, the Bay Bridge is broken and I'm relieved that I'm not having a heart attack. So, but this is what happened then. So from my perspective right now, 2024, right? 1989 doesn't seem that far away. I remember these events, right? In my lifetime, and this is why the title of that slide is Intrapersonal Conceptions of Time. So there are cultural, linguistic perceptions of time, and then there are personal, right? Your feeling to 1989 is going to be completely different than mine, because unless we share, the same age bracket. Because you are living in a different age bracket. So just because we are using the same cell phone does not necessarily mean that we are sharing the same present. So if I think back about myself, how you might feel about this. So this was in 1989, that was 35 years ago, right? So when I started here, and that was also the year, that she was born. Do you know her?
Oh.
Yeah, just have to throw that in there. Okay, so in 1989, right, 35 years ago was 1954, which to me is ancient history. Right. Ancient history. But it's the same amount of time that it is between now and when I started working here. But that seems like 100 years ago. The 35 years seem like 250 to me. I don't have that same perception of those 35 years as I do of the 35 years that just have passed. And in 1954, racial segregation was outlawed by the Supreme Court. Unbelievable. Germans won the World Cup, which actually was a huge deal because it kind of introduced Germans back into the fold, as they had been labeled pariahs for causing World War II and perpetrating the Holocaust. So this was kind of like a big deal in German national understanding, because we felt like we could kind of lift our head a tiny little bit out of the shame that Germany was in. And then also it was the Viet Minh final victory over the French, which eventually led to the Vietnam War. It seems like ancient history. I wasn't even born then. Since you are not, I wasn't born then, it seems way, way more in the past than that. But, to somebody born in 1989 or 2000, 89 might feel that way of what it feels like to me. So I'm just giving you kind of like some things to think about, what creates and constitutes history, how do we access it? If we were alive during that time, that's going to feel different, even though it is already historical, than, when we were not alive. Furthermore, there are these huge different understandings of how time even moves. In antiquity, life was considered to be cyclical. It was not going from A to B. There was no notion of moving forward. Everything that had already been there and would appear again. Nothing new was going to happen under the sun, basically. And that was based on the observation of nature, where fall and winter and spring and summer kept continuing on and on and on. And if that cycle was disrupted, that probably would spell the end of humankind. So, but then in modernity, this new understanding of time was created, where it was linear and where it moved from past to future. And then, of course, that becomes very different in how you view the present, how you think about future concerns. So just to remind myself, because I tend to kind of like blab on, and also to remind you, what we are trying to get to here is, how do we encounter his story? And first of all, it has been told by men. So I think, if women told stories, it would be different, the history, because presumably other things would get included, some things would be left out. Maybe we would learn more about some things than others. And, that is, of course, to be considered who has told history, that's one thing. And then, that history is a story. And the narrative configuration of history. So how do we access history? We access history to telling stories has a huge impact on how we encounter history. We don't look at just historical facts that are thrown out, maybe in a chronological fashion, maybe not in a chronological. This happened, this happened, and you have no idea when it happened. That's not how we encounter history. We encounter history as a story. And with that, and if you are interested in that, I highly recommend you read Hayden White, who talked about the content of the form, namely how the form shapes the content. So the history, right, the material of history shoved into the form of a story is going to change the meaning of the material that is being shoved into that form. Why? Well, first of all, there has to be a certain kind of causality, because in stories, they happen chronologically, and it's always like one event follows the other. And we think, because I got up this morning, I had to brush my teeth. But is that really the truth? Would the world have stopped if you didn't brush your teeth? I mean, is there really a causal relationship there? Or could actually other things have happened? I got up, I slipped on a banana peel, and then I didn't end up at Foothill. And there are a million different ways how you could tell the story, a million different points, data points, so to speak, you could pick up, and that would totally change the story. And also, because it is going from A to B to da-da-da, it seems ordered and perhaps preordained. So, perhaps a god or goddess already decided how that history was going to be written. And it was not, actual history unfolding. No, it was, the hand of a higher power that was sketching out, what was going to take place. The story is so compelling, though, that it is very, very difficult to get past the story in transmitting material. And in a story, there always is a conclusion. So you have to start somewhere, right? And if you tell the story of your life, think about this. How would I tell the story of my life? Where would I start? Okay, now you pick a starting point, right? Why did you pick that starting point? You see, in picking that starting point, you have already created the meaning of the story. Because that is a great beginning to end here and to prove this point. I was meant to become a professor. Of course I'm going to start, when I went to grade school or whatever. Maybe it should have started with, when I was dropped on my head. I wasn't, but whatever. Clearly there is going to be a huge effect on the story you tell and on what it means depending on where you started, and even more importantly, where you stop it. Because stopping history right now is totally arbitrary. Stopping history right now does not allow us to say the final word on history. Because guess what? As we are sitting here, history continues barreling down, the time chute, and we can't stop it. So there are other figurations when we think about history and time. Like, for example, often, in narration of survival or narration of assertion of marginalized groups, there comes, she was the first woman to step on the moon. Hasn't happened yet. The first woman to step on the moon, which erases literally all the other astronauts, all the other female astronauts, right? I mean, by first and last, you are kind of excluding those that came before or those that will come after. And it's a very great way to marginalize marginalized populations even further. And, if it was the first, well, then we don't have to worry about all the others. There was just one, all the other millions and billions of women that didn't get to land on the moon. And you can also more easily abdicate your political responsibility for those that you have just excluded with this way of telling that story. And often, actually, it's celebrated, right? It's celebratory, when it's actually nefarious. So you are being exiled to the waiting room of history, if you are not part of that first or last. Again, these are some other configurations in how we think about history. And then come the true and tried causal configurations, right? So when historians write historiography, write history, what often becomes, the underlying kind of dynamics that drive the story forward is the story of progress. And here, we have a story needs a hero, right? Yeah, and the hero there is human reason. That becomes the hero when you see these histories that are underlined with the notion of progress. You also have those modernization, then often, you will see that science and technology kind of become the hero of that story. Then, there is ideology and liberation, and, this could be the proletariat, it could be women, it could be trans community, it could be indigenous populations. These configurations, have that as the hero. And then there is, nationalism and national awakening, which has the nation as the protagonist. But how useful are these really? And how do they deter us from accessing the past? When you look at these notions of progress and modernization and nation becoming and all of those that I showed you before, you cannot escape the Enlightenment. And with that, you are smack dab in Western civilization. And I just undertook actually a study of all the 117 community colleges in California, speaking to my dean right now, who's sitting in the last row. Hi, Erin. And I looked at how many of these 117 community colleges have a humanities department. And there are 49 who have a humanities department. And then I went a little step further and I listed all the courses that were taught by these humanities departments. And there is not a single humanities department that not in one way or another traces the history of Western civilization. So in teaching the human experience in California, and I would dare to pose really the United States and other places as well, the Enlightenment, the stepping out of beyond the tutelage of God and relying on our own reason is so formative in how, the world is expected to see itself. It's not necessarily shared by all corners of the world. And this image that you see here actually is not a rational painting, it's actually a romantic painting. And you can see, that this is kind of the Romantics came perhaps a tiny step later, and it's kind of a romanticizing of this enlightened period where people sit around in reading rooms in their homes. This is like the original book club here that you see. And yes, it was in private spaces. So how awesome was this? Because this allowed women to get access to it. Because once, the transmission of knowledge was put solely into public places, universities, etc., women did not have access to that at that time. And, we are reading Moliere here, but, the man is still reading the book. However, I'm sure the women at that time were also literate because, the Enlightenment increased literacy rates to no end. So this idea of progress and modernization and ideology and nationalism. So let me show you a couple of paintings, because I am a humanities instructor, so I also heavily rely on art as an inquiry into the human condition and what it says and how it conceptualizes ideas about us. So the first painting here is by Diego Velázquez, a Spanish painter of the Baroque age. And you see here, the image of a royal person of the court. It's pre-enlightened. We are celebrating nobility. The horse is chumpy, not super athletic. I don't think this is a war situation. This is like a little romp in the country. So that was, what this duke wanted to put in his living room, so he commissioned Diego Velázquez to paint this. And then, we get a little bit past the Enlightenment and past the French Revolution, and, it hasn't been all that successful. And Napoleon, a non-royal, actually ascends to become from the leader of France. And this is a painting by Jacques-Louis David, done in 1801, and you can see already that the style also changes, right? It's much more lifelike, much more realistic. You know, we are moving toward photography, right? Because we believe, yes, we can capture reality. And of course, you know, we are celebrating Napoleon here. This is a, you know, a supporter of Napoleon at this point, and Napoleon knows where he is going, and he says, "Follow me over the Alps." That's what Napoleon is saying. And so, you know, maybe we can say, oh, look, you know, this is progress, right? I mean, here, you know, we're moving forward. I mean, in art, yeah, you know, we can see this much more realistic, and yeah, realism, materialism, much better. And then, you know, we are careening back into barbarity, because, you know, here we have a similar painting, another person on the horse, and, you know, I'm sure you all know who that is. And again, you know, we can't really say after the 20th century that this project of progress, you know, is unfettered. Only 5 minutes, oh my God. It is completely unfettered. So I'm just going to move ahead a little faster. Okay. Then, you know, there are also other approaches to history real quickly, you know, that have to do with memory, trauma, and historical injustices. And Professor Rachel Moore here, she currently teaches a course on trauma. And if you are taking that course, I am sure you have experienced these approaches to history. Now, what I would pose is that there are not these stories that follow, you know, one monolithic kind of a line, but that actually history is an interrelation of temporal and historical layers. And historiography, really up to this point, has failed to capture this. And I want you to show you this, and I want to ask you, what do you see? And I want you to look very closely. What do you see? This is actually a historical representation. What do you see? You were in my class, Gabriella, right? Okay, so let's not, yeah, if you were in my class, let's not do that. What do you see? I have only 5 more minutes, let's go quickly. Huh?
Dark.
Dark, you see dark, right. Anything a little darker than the other?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what's a little darker here? Okay, Gabriella, tell her. These are the Twin Towers. This is actually the cover of the New Yorker magazine on September 24th, 2001. So, you know, this shows a duality of times, right? At the same time, you see the absent has been manifested, and you also experience the presence, because there is no absence without presence, and there is no presence without absence, right? In order to understand that concept, we need to entertain both of these notions, correct? Here, I'm just going to quickly go through this. If you have not read Mouse by Art Spiegelman, this is Art Spiegelman actually who created this cover of the New Yorker. He also wrote Mouse, which details his father's experience in Auschwitz. And what you see here is Art and his father talking in the presence, which is in the late 80s. And then this is the representation of Auschwitz, the camp. And again, you know, he is able to capture, because it's artistic, he is able to capture both historical times simultaneously. And you see that in the smoke stacks, the umbrella here and the smoke stacks here, you know, we see how the past invades the present. These are images from the Warsaw Ghetto when the Germans contained Jews in these camps prior to shipping them to concentration camps. And you know, this is obviously a very emotional, difficult image to look at, suffering children. And you know, here we are looking at Jewish resistance fighters who fought the Nazis, who were poised to liquidate the ghetto. Which image or which story would you rather hear? Think about that. Which story do you think is going to be made into a movie? Think about that. And you know, I always say to my students, if you want to get an Oscar in Hollywood, make a movie about the Holocaust. The Holocaust is tremendously compelling to American filmmakers. I personally think it's a proxy engagement, because Americans are not poised to see the own Holocaust that they have created with their native population, and it needs to be worked out. Slavery, it needs to be worked out, and you know, it's easier to look at other people's perpetrator than one's own. So obviously, you know, the stories that are being told and the stories that end up in history books and are read are not necessarily historically more prevalent, because the suffering clearly was way more prevalent. And even in hindsight, this is telling me that my lecture is over.
No.
Oh, sorry. Even if we look at this, it commemorates. This is a statue that commemorates the ghetto in Warsaw. This is a statue done by Nathan Rappaport. And, you know, what does it tell? I mean, if you didn't know that this was commemorating the Warsaw ghetto and in tremendous human suffering, it looks more like a, you know, fight for liberation. And yeah, why? Because, you know, similar tropes are being engaged that you see here in Liberty Leading the People, commemorating the French Revolution. And, you know, question, why do women need to bare their breasts, you know, for these liberation movements? But that's a discussion for another
Next.
Furthermore, you know, art, of course, can create these moments of duality of time. This, what you see here, is an installation by Szymon Atti in Berlin, where, you know, obviously the Jews had disappeared for a while because they had been murdered in a genocide. And what he has done here, he has taken images, photographs from a different time and superimposed them over the same location where they were shot before, in that way, you know, bringing back that history. I'm going to flip over this here. Why are you not responding? Okay, I'm not going to talk about this. I'm not going to talk about this, which is the German memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe. But what I want to talk about is the polychronic present. And you know, if you give a presentation and Word is constantly telling you that you have spelling errors, you know you're cutting edge. And this word, you know, tells me it's spelled incorrectly, but I checked it over and over again, it is spelled correctly. So polychronic presence, right? So that right now, as we are sitting here, there are different presences in operation that are, if we go back to this first slide that I showed you, where it says, you know, that we are our pasts. Since we have different pasts, we enter into pasts differently, and there could be multiple of other pasts. By definition, there could be multiple of presence, and there are multiple of presence operating right now. So there is a twofold meaning of contemporaneity. And that is, it is, you know, at the same time, right? But it also means that it is with, getting back to my past as a ESL instructor, that in this constitution of the present, the different pasts come in and create simultaneous presence, you know, yeah, at the same time. Okay, I'm going to end here just with my concluding, thought that I want to leave you with. I had hoped that I could tell you about this incredible movie that I urge you to see. It just won Best Film, Best Foreign Film, obviously, and it's called The Zone of Interest. And I also encourage you to see the acceptance speech of the Oscar for this movie, which is really, really amazing. This movie talks about the life of the commander of Auschwitz, who had his family living directly adjacent to Auschwitz, the camp. And what you see in the dark there is the camp. And in the movie, you never, ever, ever see this camp. Mm-hmm. And when I first started teaching the Holocaust, I always said, why are there no stories about perpetrators? You know, because victim narratives always, or very often, focus on survival. And the Holocaust, the story of the Holocaust is not survival. The Holocaust history looks like this. And in this movie focuses on the perpetrators, and it is chilling. You do not see any kind of violence. You hear some violent noises, but you do not see any violence, and it is really amazing. I mean, it really says that we have reached a different distance from the past to now tell that story in a different way. So let me just end by saying the paradoxes of our encounters with history are productive reminders of the fragility of our attempts to bring order and meaning to the world. Deeply we want to bring meaning to the world, and these attempts are very fragile. It matters because it shapes our notion of ethics, and we as humans conceptualize how reality ought to be. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Dr. Cammin. So it's open for discussion. If you have any questions, comments, or anything, please.
Yeah, so I found it very interesting when you were showing two pictures which were similar in different, points of time. And as I'm studying more of history, what I notice is there's repetitive history, and they say history repeats itself. So my question is, how do we really know when something is actually unique?
That is a very good question. And the answer would be, of course, we can never know this because, the book is not finished, right? Is it unique at this time? I would say most likely not. I think our propensity to consider our time unique, to consider ourselves unique, is preposterous. So I think, uniqueness is hugely overrated. So, like for example, if you say, the Holocaust is a unique moment in history, I wish that it were, but it's not. If we look at our human history, we are wired to destroy each other. We can other each other. That is something that other animals can't necessarily do, but we can make others into others and not recognize them as humans anymore.
So. I mean, to me, that's part of the sadness, is we actually have so much information, but we forget it or we de-emphasize it so that it disappears.
Right, and one of the ways we do it is, by believing into this idea of progress, right? We have left it behind. We are no longer in the caves clobbering each other over the head with sticks, right? But then, these events happen and we have to realize that that's actually not the case. Yeah, precisely.
Of course.
Because we have better means. Charlie?
Yeah. You talked a little bit at the beginning regarding culture and how it ties into history. Could it also be a generational thing? And the example I personally think of is like two visits to the Berlin Wall area once back in the late 80s, where I went to the museums and there was nothing regarding World War II, and especially the whole Hitler regime. They were trying to avoid it. But then I went back maybe about 10 years ago, and the museum was absolutely covered with, during this time, all these autobiographies of Hitler. And I talked to the store clerk, and he said, yeah, it's kind of a generation thing. The generation back in '89 still wanted to ignore it, but now the newer generations come along, wants to learn from it.
Yeah, actually, there is an attempt to actually divide time not by years or decades, but by generations. And that goes back to the polychronic presence, right? The way you experience the world is so colored by your generation. Just think about, the music that your parents love. And the music that you love. And you know what? I mean, in 20 years, your children are going to go, what kind of music did you love? But it imprints us, right? The generation we were born into, we have no choice, imprints us, absolutely. And that also, of course, forms in how we look at history, and also the fact that we are moving further and further away. So maybe my parents, or definitely my grandparents, were responsible citizens in Germany at the time. So how I look at that history is different than my children or grandchildren would look at it, because they don't even know their great-great-grandparents, right? I mean, it will change how we look at history. As the survivors, obviously are no longer, not many are with us anymore. That kind of direct access to memory disappears, etc., etc. And also talk to your siblings. I mean, about something that happened in your family. They tell totally different stories about your family, and you're going, that's not the family I grew up in. Most likely not, because your sibling experience was different. Yeah, go ahead.
Earlier in your lecture, you talked about how certain groups of people don't, unlike us, interpret and categorize time into three different concepts: past, present, future. How do those groups of people interpret time?
So it's not necessarily past, present, or future. You know, I think those are underlying concepts because we understand we are going to die. You know, we understand that there is a time after us, right? So, and that can be defined as the future. But how we move through time is culturally different, slower or faster. And, you know, whether we see time as going from A to B or filling up a vessel rather than a straight line, those kind of conceptions are different. Yeah, Gabriel?
So what is the value of you who remembers 1989? Like in the political sense, like older people have experienced more decades. And yet I believe that if you look back at history, it's still just as valuable. So what's the difference of living through it and just looking back? Well, you explained it a little bit in its political sense.
I don't know in a political sense. I know in an emotional and ethical sense, you know, what am I committed to? What do I go back to in explaining current events to me? You know, those are the events that I go back to, right? Because they were formative, right? So in a human lifetime, they become formative. But I think there are certain posts in historic time that humans need to be aware of in explaining where we are at. I mean, we are certainly right now in the Anthropocene, right? So the fact that we started burning fossil fuels is hugely important. Is that the start of the Anthropocene? Maybe. Maybe it was with the ignition of the nuclear bomb when, you know, we created changes in the rock formations. You know what I'm saying? So you know, those kind of things are important politically to use. But there's also, you know, your experience of your life and understanding your own life. But for the political, I would go to that.
So thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Cammin. Thank you, our colleagues. Thank you, students, for coming to campus, attending the lecture. The signing sheet will be out there. Sign in there, then I'll take care of the rest. Thank you, and have a best of your day.